When Lightfall released, I grabbed 2 of my friends and we played through the Legendary Campaign in one sitting. In this video, I'm going to review every mission from both a story and gameplay perspective. If you haven't played yet, I would highly recommend going in blind because some story and gameplay moments won't hit as hard if they're spoilered ahead of time. With that said, my brief non-spoiler review is that the Lightfall Legendary Campaign is a very enjoyable experience on par with the gameplay of Witch Queen. Strand alone is so fun that it could sell this expansion on its own. Story-wise, Lightfall isn't quite as good as Witch Queen, but I still liked it. Seriously, go play the campaign yourself and then come back to watch the rest of this video. I thought it was pretty good. I'm interested to see some discussion of the campaign in the comments, so let me know what you think. Without further ado, let's get into this. Before the first mission, Lightfall plays 2 cutscenes. The first serves as a story recap that helps bring players up to speed on what they need to know to understand Lightfall's story. The second is the proper opening cutscene to the expansion's story. Including a story recap cutscene is a fantastic quality of life feature, especially considering that a significant amount of the prelude to Lightfall's story was conveyed through now sunset seasonal content. It does a much better job of introducing the player to the Destiny universe's story than the Witch Queen opening does. The Lightfall opening cutscene picks up right where Final Dawn, the closing mission of Season of the Seraph, ends. The Vanguard, Awoken, Keitel, and House of Light unite to face the forces of the Witness. The Traveler even helps out by firing a massive laser beam at the Witness, causing silver trees to grow on a pyramid ship, which has some interesting lore implications. That's a story for another time though. The Witness ultimately uses the Traveler to learn the location of the Veil on Neptune, and sends Callus and his Shadow Legion to attack it. Osiris and the Guardians stow away on a Cabal ship to stop Callus. Lightfall's first mission is called First Contact. It takes place on a Cabal ship on its way to Neptune. This mission was mostly a bit boring as the environment felt like every other Cabal space we've explored in Destiny 2. However, there were a few standout moments that I really enjoyed. The introduction to Tormentors was very exciting. I like that they're a very aggressive enemy that disables light abilities and forces the player to retreat to avoid getting grabbed. It changes up the combat significantly as most Destiny enemies aren't as aggressive about rushing the player aside from Thrall. Getting grabbed by a Tormentor feels dangerous because in the Legendary Campaign, they're strong enough to nearly one-shot the player during the grab attack. I love them. They're basically the Lightfall campaign's version of Hive Guardians. I also loved the moment where we enter a Cabal drop pod and use it to land on the surface of Neomuna. It's incredibly cool. Finally, I enjoyed the introduction to Strand on Neomuna. My fire team and I were super excited to try out the new subclass, so getting a chance to get our hands on it was amazing. The Strand subclass is probably the biggest selling point of Lightfall. While my friends and I played the campaign, we kept remarking that the most annoying part was that Lightfall kept giving us Strand and then taking it away, similar to how Beyond Light handled stasis. There are specific sections of each of the 8 missions where the player is Strand empowered, meaning we were able to use a version of the subclass without fully unlocking it. These sections feature less ability cooldown than normal, so might not be entirely representative of how the subclass plays normally, but allowed us to, in the word of one of my friends, go feral with Strand. You don't actually fully unlock the subclass until finishing the campaign, but you get to use it for most of the final 2 missions. I absolutely adore Strand. While it might not be the best class in terms of pure DPS or survivability, it's absolutely the most fun. I loved traversing areas with the grapple ability because it feels incredibly intuitive. Unlike most games that feature grappling hook mechanics, Strand doesn't require the player to aim at predetermined grapple points. The grapple point can be anywhere in space. There are pre-existing Strand grapple spheres that appear in the air in some areas, but they aren't required to use grapple. The way Lightfall incentivizes their use is making grapple points free, meaning a charge isn't expended when grappling to pre-existing points. However, the player doesn't need to find an existing point to use grapple. They can grapple anywhere else, it will just cost a grapple charge. This might sound like it would limit the utility of Strand, but it actually felt very balanced, as the recharge was fast enough that you could use it fairly often, but not so fast that you could break encounters by never falling off the map. Grappling also integrates seamlessly into Destiny's combat loop by allowing the player to grapple onto almost anything. You can grapple onto enemies, other players, and even some enemy projectiles like Callus's bees to traverse the space. This makes Strand gameplay incredibly dynamic, intuitive, and addicting, as you can experience the power fantasy of being Spider-Man swinging through a big city. If it seems like you should be able to grapple something, you usually can. I also didn't find the game missing what I was trying to grapple onto very often. I did occasionally try to grapple onto enemies and fail, so it's not perfect, but works better than I expected. One of my favorite parts of the Strand experience is chaining ability combos. Most Strand abilities feel like they have fairly short cooldowns in the Legendary Campaign, so you can easily chain grapples with melee, tangles, or even finishers to unleash combos that deal additional damage to enemies. I first played the Lightfall Legendary Campaign on my Warlock, so I had the aspect Weaver's Call, which causes threadlings to spawn and seek enemies when you use a healing or empowering rift. This ability added a whole new level of gameplay to the Warlock class abilities, which are usually reserved for healing when your health gets low or for a burst of DPS. With a healing rift, threadlings allow you to damage and potentially immobilize enemies that are nearby, making deployment even more strategic. I found myself jumping towards enemies when popping my healing rift instead of the normal Warlock playstyle of running to cover to pop your healing rift when you get low on health. I absolutely adore Strand's neutral game and find it the most fun of any subclass. There are other grenade options besides grapple, but they're not as fun as grapple. Grapple is just so fun to use. After the campaign, when not Strand empowered, Strand's ability cooldowns are a bit longer. This takes away some of the fun power fantasy of grappling everywhere, so I think it would be good if the cooldowns were decreased a little. It isn't horrible when not empowered, but it's just not quite as fun as it was in the Legendary Campaign. After the first mission, the player gets our first major introduction to the new friendly NPCs, Nimbus and Rohan, two of Neptune's Cloud Striders. Rohan is a grizzled veteran, while Nimbus is the rookie sidekick. Nimbus was my favorite character of the campaign. It's so rare to get portrayals of trans and non-binary people that aren't mostly centered on their experience with gender. Those kinds of stories are important and deserve to be told, but it's nice to have a story where a trans character has already discovered their gender and gets to live their life authentically. I particularly enjoyed that Nimbus is a very joyful and goofy character. It's pretty typical to see stories about trans and non-binary characters that have to deal with a lot of discrimination, adversity, and trauma, which is realistic but can be painful for the very group it's intended to represent, including me. It was so nice to see Nimbus get to have fun being a 12-foot tall cyberpunk warrior. It also helps that a non-binary voice actor, Marin Miller, portrayed the character, bringing a lot of authenticity to the role. The second mission is called Under Siege, which serves as the introduction to Neomuna proper. Players fight through Shadow Legion forces and try to beat them to the Veil. Unfortunately, we fail and Callus secures the area before we arrive. Under Siege was more fun than the first mission, and I really enjoyed exploring Neomuna. One thing I noticed while playing the campaign is that Neomuna felt very empty. The citizens have their consciousnesses uploaded to a machine called the Cloud Arc. They inhabit the city virtually as holograms. However, the holograms we see are very static, which makes Neomuna feel devoid of life. I would like to have seen the holograms more mobile and dynamic to make the city feel lived in. I don't know if it would have been too hard to accomplish, but seeing the holograms interact a bit more by running away from enemy combatants would have made Neomuna feel a lot more realistic. Another note is that the campaign doesn't do a great job of answering questions about how and why Neomuna was hidden from the entire solar system for so long. It felt rather unaddressed aside from a few lines about the Ishtar Collective being involved and Cloud Striders fearing Guardians. One thing I loved about Neomuna is the Pukas' extremely empathetic flying AI robofish. Pukas played a lot less of a role than I thought they would going in, but we do learn a lot about them, particularly that they're used as therapy animals for the citizens of Neomuna. Given how cute they are, I want to see more Puka content. especially therapy pukas. It would be really cool to see some of our characters who have experienced massive traumas in the Destiny story get to heal with the help of our fishy friends. I've digressed a bit, so let's get back to the mission. At the end, we see a transmission where Callus tells the witness he is making progress at securing the veil. Ghost makes a comment that foreshadows the events of the climax. He says he feels weird and that the witness is affecting him somehow, even worse than when he was possessed by the darkness in previous campaigns. I didn't notice this until reviewing my campaign footage to write this video, but it's excellent writing that builds upon the previously established effects of the witness on ghosts. The third mission is called Downfall. Players assault Callus's pyramid ship and try to thwart his plans to take the veil by destroying something called the radial mast. During the mission and several others, Osiris is constantly complaining that we don't have time to waste and need to get to the veil immediately. I understand his urgency given that the traveler is under threat, but it's a bit frustrating to have Osiris yelling at me for being too slow when the game doesn't let me traverse the level any faster than I already am without abusing advanced movement tech. It's a bit frustrating and makes Osiris seem like a jerk. At the end of the mission, the Guardian loses to Shadow Legion forces, prompting a need to escape. However, the mission didn't really spawn enough enemies to make this feel urgent, and the enemies that were in the arena were immune, which led to it feeling like the mission had paused and the team was supposed to wait for something to happen. Suddenly, Kaido rescues the player from Callus, prompting a fun escape sequence where you take a sparrow to the exit. This sequence took a bit too long to trigger, which ruined my immersion in the moment. I was left wondering what I was supposed to do until Kaido arrived, which robs the scene of tension. It's very similar to the criticism I have of Eris Morn saving the player from Crota's funeral back in the Taken King expansion. At the end of the mission, we get a cutscene about Kaido and Callus's relationship as father and daughter, which gave us final confirmation that the vision Callus had in the abyss at the end of the universe was indeed sent by the Witness, which helps tie Callus's disciplehood into previous lore, which I appreciated a lot. There also is a moment where we see baby Kaido, which I, a hatchling huddle enjoyer, liked a lot. She looks surprisingly cute for the Cabal. Kaido says we aren't yet ready to face Callus, so we take a detour to a different enemy attacking Neomuna, the Vex. The fourth mission is called Breakneck, in which the player has to stop a Vex incursion into the Cloud Arc to prevent the deaths of Neomuna's virtual inhabitants. This is largely a side plot that doesn't have very many story beats, but I loved the gameplay as we get more time with Strand and started to master its mechanics a bit more. The fifth mission on the Verge is also about the Vex and learning to master Strand, so I have pretty similar feelings about it. The Vex missions are super fun from a gameplay perspective, but feel like filler from a story perspective aside from a few revelations about the nature of Strand. At the end of the fifth mission, the player learns that Callus has breached the Veil, so we rush to stop him in the sixth mission on the Verge. In this mission, Rohan and the Guardians try to stop Callus and his minions. It features a tank section which was pretty fun. It's been a minute since a Destiny campaign has featured a tank section, so I enjoyed this. It was a good change of pace. In On the Verge, a new mechanic is introduced where there are devices that block Guardians' abilities and can't be damaged by arc, void, solar, stasis, or kinetic damage, and can only be destroyed by using Strand. This is an interesting mechanic for the Lightfall campaign, which is very Strand focused, but would be super annoying anywhere else in the game. The blockers did enhance the campaign experience, but they did make the constant giving and taking away of Strand feel kind of annoying and contrived. If we were simply given a full version of Strand earlier in the campaign, it would have solved this problem. At the end of the sixth mission, Rohan tries to stop the radial mast from attacking the Veil, but is killed because the Guardian isn't able to help destroy the mast because it can only be killed with Strand, and of course, we lose Strand right before Rohan needs our help. I found Rohan's death a bit predictable. It was very frustrating to have a character introduced that so fully embodies the grizzled veteran who dies right before a retirement trope. I wished we had gotten more time to develop Rohan as a character before he died, so his death would have been more impactful. I also felt the player losing Strand right before the critical moment when we could have used it to save him felt very contrived. It didn't really land for me in the moment. I've seen a lot of criticism over the way the story handles Nimbus's grief over Rohan's death, but I emphatically disagree. I relate a lot to the way Nimbus grieves Rohan. On a personal note, I lost 3 of my 4 grandparents in the last year. The experience taught me a lot about how I personally handle grief. In media, it's pretty common to see people feel sad or angry about a death right away. This year, I saw a lot of my family members grieve that way, which is perfectly valid. However, I learned that not everyone processes a loss at the same speed or in the same way. In the time leading up to each funeral, relatives came from out of town and there was a lot of time to socialize and collectively grieve. I felt very numb initially about each death and didn't start to fully process the sadness I felt until after each funeral. This made me feel guilty that I wasn't feeling more in the moment when everyone was there collectively trying to grieve. However, it wasn't until everyone left that the loss finally set in. I learned that I need time and space to let myself feel grief, and that it's hard for me to do it with an audience. I found it very realistic and relatable that Nimbus doesn't start grieving Rohan right away. They need to save their city before they have time to process their feelings about losing their mentor. I also appreciated that they were able to still be themselves and feel joy while in the grieving process. Grief isn't a linear experience. There are always going to be peaks and valleys. Sometimes when you're in a valley, you're able to find joy. Other times, the grief blocks out everything else. You can only meet each moment as it comes. It's okay to not be sad all the time when grieving because the human body isn't wired to feel a single emotion for days or weeks until you're done grieving a loss. Also, Nimbus does do a lot of grieving eventually. It just isn't until the post-campaign content when they have time to sit with their feelings and process them because the world-ending threat has been defeated. After the 6th mission, players take a break from legendary campaign missions to complete the new strike Hypernet current. This strike takes place inside the Vex network and is incredibly beautiful. I love the vibrant colors that truly match the neon aesthetic of Neomuna. I also really enjoyed the Taken Hydra boss because it isn't a type of Taken we see very often. The Dark Shield looks sick. The penultimate mission is called Headlong. The player must master Strand before facing Callus at the Veil. This mission is also set in the Vex network and features just as incredible visuals as the strike. There's a major emphasis on Strand parkour in this mission, which was super fun and challenging. My fire team struggled the most on the final encounter of this mission more than any other, probably because me and one of my friends were slightly under the effective power cap for the mission. Like Witch Queen, the Lightfall Legendary Campaign increases the power level of each mission. The effective power level is capped at 15 levels under the light level of each mission. The game gives you gear that increases in power each mission. For most of the campaign, we were immediately able to launch into the next mission and still be at the effective power level we needed. However, for some reason, only one member of my 3-person fire team was at the power level for the final mission, Desperate Measures, when we got there. We had to go do the seasonal story to get up to the power level required for the final mission, which seems to be somewhat of an RNG problem with the way the loot is given to the player. We're not exactly sure why it happened, but it would be nice if each previous mission was guaranteed to drop a full set of gear at the level for the next mission from the final chest. That way you wouldn't have needing to go grind up power levels interrupting the campaign experience. In Desperate Measures, there's an opening section where you defend the Veil from an onslaught of the Shadow Legion. The enemy density is incredible, but the Destiny engine struggles to deal with this many enemies at once. Everyone in my fire team experienced massive frame rate drops, even worse than the DPS phase of Daughters in remastered Kingsfall, which usually causes the game to chug for me. It was incredibly fun, but the game really struggles to make everything work. There's also a Nimbus line that had my entire fire team cackling.
Sounds like someone's coming around to the untested Ishtar weapon.
Enemy tanks are headed to your position.
That sounds like a job for untested Ishtar weapon.
Untested Ishtar Weapon is such a weird name that it works perfectly for this scene. My fire team and I just kept referring to it as Untested Ishtar Weapon constantly, and another friend who was in a Discord VC was very confused about what we were going on about. When we finally see the Veil in the final mission, I would have liked to see more of an explanation as to what it is and why the Witness needed it to commune with the Traveler. I'm sure we'll probably learn more in future seasonal stories, but the Veil is the central MacGuffin MacGuffin of Lightfall. It seems very important to explain clearly during the story why it was important and what it can do. From the final mission, all I know is what it looks like and that it's a paracausal thing that somehow the witness is able to use to commune with the traveler. The Callus boss fight is also very fun, but using Strand makes it much harder than it needs to be. My team ended up having me not pick up Strand and use the Starfire Protocol build instead to make the fight much easier. We kept having problems with the enemies booping us off the side of the map and falling and dying, which with res tokens makes the fight really difficult. It seems like Bungie was trying to make the main theme of Lightfall failure, as the Guardian is constantly failing to achieve their goals. However, this theme is very difficult to pull off in an interactive medium, which I think leads to some ludonarrative dissonance. If you're unfamiliar with the term ludonarrative dissonance, it's basically when the story told by the player's interactions with the gameplay doesn't match the writing of a game's story. A lot of the time I was supposed to have failed as a player wasn't because of anything I did wrong. It was because my failure was predetermined to get to the next set piece the writers had come up with. This is a difficult problem to solve for a game with a linear story. It's much easier to pull off in a non-interactive medium where the player doesn't need to constantly succeed to progress like a movie. I didn't feel like I had failed at all personally during the Lightfall campaign because I beat the campaign, but the Guardian was supposed to have failed at each turn. I think it would have been better to make the set pieces intentionally impossible, but in a way that felt organic rather than contrived. That would have made the failure in the story much more impactful than it is right now. Speaking of ludonarrative dissonance, I think there's sometimes a bit of a problem when the Guardian is on screen in cutscenes. I didn't really put my finger on this until Lightfall, but it feels unnerving to see my player characters speak and act in cutscenes because they often make choices I wouldn't had I been in control like I am during the gameplay. I would personally have struggled, but would have tried to shoot Ghost in the ending cutscene. It would have been a much more powerful moment if the player got to choose whether to kill or save Ghost rather than the outcome being chosen by the writers. During that final cutscene where Ghost is taken control of by the Witness and used to commune with the Veil, I knew that the Guardian wasn't going to kill Ghost because it would have broken the lore justification for the gameplay loop of Destiny. People who lose their Ghost lose access to light abilities. When I saw the Guardian raise their weapon, I really wanted to see them fire. It would have been an incredibly emotional and well-earned sacrifice that would have taken a lot of courage for Bungie to go with. The ending where the Witness succeeds and uses the Veil to infiltrate the Traveler and commune with it was really interesting and felt like a gut punch. Everyone expected us to immediately lose the light, but for some reason we didn't. It seems like it's going to take a while longer for the Witness's plan to fully unravel. It was a very shocking moment that worked for me. I almost cried after Zavala and Ikora's speeches about continuing to fight after the loss of the Traveler. They hit me like a gut punch, especially Zavala's speech. I also want to give a quick shout out to the Bungie music team, as I think Lightfall's soundtrack is incredible. It nicely balances an orchestral sound with rock and EDM elements to create a rich soundscape for the campaign. The Bungie music team never misses. All of their music is fantastic, and that continues with Lightfall. Overall, I'd say Lightfall is about on par with Witch Queen, as Strand is incredibly fun to play with, and there were still some story moments that I found very effective, even though there weren't as many that were as impactful as Witch Queen. It's hard to beat the Queen of Lies. I'm curious to see how people's opinions of Lightfall differ from mine in the comments, so make sure to let me know. My name is eforme. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.